Here we go again. The rib cage or thoracic cage is our next topic. Learning outcomes for this video. Name the bones of the thoracic cage. Pretty straightforward on that one. Differentiate between true and false ribs. What in the heck? True false questions? No, hang on. True and false actually means something different here. What is the thoracic cage? It is composed of the thoracic vertebrae along the back, so the vertebrae are actually part of this. Sternum and costal cartilage is up in the front. Ribs over on the sides. Functions of the thoracic cage: it protects the vital organs in your chest. It supports the shoulder girdles and the upper limbs, and it provides attachment sites for muscles of the neck, back, chest, and shoulders. Let's take a look at the first bone we're going to look at in detail, the sternum or breastbone. It's actually not a bone, it's really three fused bones in an adult. We have at the top a manubrium. You can actually feel your own manubrium. If you put your finger at the base of your neck, you can feel the notch at the upper edge of that. It articulates with the clavicles and with ribs 1 and 2. The body is below the manubrium. It's the middle part of the sternum, and it articulates with the costal cartilages of ribs 2 through 7. The xiphoid or xiphoid process is the bottom tip of the sternum, and it is a site for muscle attachment. In people under 40, it's not fully ossified, and it's actually mostly cartilage. You can see that in the image on our next page. Here I'll focus on just the sternum. We have a manubrium on the top. The upper edge of the manubrium is the jugular notch. Off to the side, you have a clavicular notch where the clavicle would attach. We have below the manubrium the body of the sternum. At the very base, the very tip of this, we have a xiphoid or xiphoid process. This one is cartilage, so it's a person definitely younger than 40. And together, the manubrium plus the body plus the xiphoid process are the sternum. A few landmarks to be aware of as you're examining a sternum. The jugular notch is that notch you can feel at the base of your neck. Where the manubrium and the body meet, we have a line called the sternal angle. And where the body and the xiphoid meet, we have a xiphosternal joint. In this image, we can see vertebrae on the back. They are numbered here T2 through T9. We also see up in front the sternum. The level of T2 is where you would find the jugular notch. The level of T4 is the level where you'd find the sternal angle. And about T9 is where you're going to find the xiphosternal joint. Between the vertebrae in the back and the sternum in the front is, of course, the space enclosed by the thoracic cage. Ribs and their attachments. There are 12 pairs of ribs in both males and females. All of these attach posteriorly to the bodies and transverse processes of the thoracic vertebrae. Pairs 1 through 7, they're interesting. We call these the true ribs. Sometimes the vertebrosternal ribs, and I personally like the name vertebrosternal ribs better. Tells you they attach to the vertebrae in the back and the sternum in the front. The reason that they're called true ribs, and again, I'm not really crazy about that name, is that they attach directly to the sternum by their own individual costal cartilage. So every rib, 1 through 7, has its own personal costal cartilage attaching it to the sternum. That's not true for pairs 8 through 12. They're sometimes called the false ribs. Again, I'm not really crazy about the term false here, but it is pretty standard. They attach either indirectly or not at all to the sternum. 8 through 10, so rib 8, 9, and 10, are called vertebrochondral ribs, and they attach indirectly to the sternum by joining the costal cartilage of rib number 7. Pairs 11 and 12 do not attach to the sternum at all. They're called floating ribs, or sometimes vertebral, because they're attached to the vertebrae and not attached at all in the front. As we take a look at this image, you can see what I've been talking about. Ribs 1 through 7 are the true ribs, and each rib, rib 1, rib 2, rib 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 all have their own personal cartilage. On the other hand, 8, 9, 10 attach to the underside of 7. 11 and 12 do not attach to the front at all. They simply attach back on the vertebrae. A little bit about rib structure. The main parts of the rib are the head, which articulates with the facets and demifacets on the vertebrae. The neck, which is of course a narrowed portion just below the head, very accurately named. There's a tubercle or bump that is lateral to the head. This thing articulates with the transverse costal facet of the same numbered thoracic vertebrae. Then the shaft is actually most of the length of the rib. We've got a picture on the next page that will help with all of these parts. I'm going to start over at the vertebrae and work our way back around to the sternum up in the front. Over here, setting next to the vertebrae, we've got the head, which is articulating with the superior costal facet on the vertebrae. The tubercle, which is articulating with the costal facet on the transverse process. Then we curve back around and get to the main part of the shaft, which comes forward and joins the costal cartilage, and that's what actually joins the sternum. Now look at the cross section. You can actually tell when you hold a rib in your hand what's the top and what's the bottom. You don't have to look at the curve and try to figure out which direction it's curving, because you can't really tell. The curve is similar on the right and left side. You need to know which is the top and which is the bottom, and the top is more rounded, and the bottom is actually, this picture is a little misleading, the bottom is actually a little bit sharp. So that would be the major structures to look for as you're identifying a rib. By the way, this one would be number 1 through 7. It's one of the true ribs because it's got its own personal costal cartilage. Okay, let's take a slightly different view. This is a top-down view, and I like the fact that you can see that the head sets against the superior costal facet and that the tubercle plugs into the transverse costal facet. Great view of the way the rib articulates with the vertebrae. In this image we see a real rib. You can very nicely see the head, which is setting on the narrowed neck, and just behind that we have the tubercle with its articular facet. As we curve around, you can see down here that the bottom edge of the rib is indeed slightly sharpened, and as we come on around to where we join with the costal cartilage, you can see that the junction with the costal cartilage is indeed a little cupped on the end, and the cartilage fits right in there. This happens to be a right hand rib. It happens to be about rib number 6, so it's fairly low in the chest. Concept checks. I know you were waiting for this slide to get here, weren't you? How does a true rib differ from a false rib? Really, what do the words true and false imply? Tip here, it has something to do with cartilage. What is the sternal angle and what is its clinical importance? The sides, ribs, and the sternum. There's actually a third group of bones that make up the thoracic cage. What is that third group of bones? That will do it for this video. We have 2 more, and we'll finish with the chapter and ready for the test.